One summer along about 1904, my father rented a camp on a lake in Maine and took us all there for the month of August. We all got ringworm and then from some kittens and had to rub Pond's extract on our arms and legs night and morning. And my father rolled over in a canoe with all his clothes on. But outside of that, the vacation was a success. And from then on, none of us ever thought there was any place in the world like that lake in Maine. We returned summer after summer, always on August 1 for a month. I have since become a saltwater man, but sometimes in the summer there are days when the restlessness of the tides and the fearful cold of the seawater and the incessant wind that blows across the afternoon and into the evening make me wish for the placidity of a lake in the woods. A few weeks ago, this feeling got so strong, I bought myself a couple of bass hooks and a spinner and returned to the lake where we used to go for a week's fishing and to revisit old haunts. I took along my son, who had never got any fresh water up his nose and who had seen lily pads only from train windows. On the journey over to the lake, I began to wonder what it would be like. I wondered how time would have marred this unique, this holy spot, the coves and streams, the hills that the sun set behind the camps, and the paths behind the camps. I was sure that the tarred road would have found it out, and I wondered in what other ways it would be desolated. It is strange how much you can remember about places like that once you allow your mind to return into the grooves that lead back. You remember one thing, and then that suddenly reminds you of another. And I guess I remembered clearest of all the early mornings when the lake was cool and motionless. Remembered how the bedroom smelled of the lumber it was made of and of the wet woods whose scent entered through the screen. The partitions in the camp were thin and did not extend clear to the top of the rooms, and I was always the first up, and I would dress softly so as not to wake the others and sneak out into the sweet outdoors and start out in the canoe, keeping close along the shore and the long shadows of the pines. I remembered being very careful never to rub my paddle against the gunwale for fear of disturbing the stillness of the cathedral. This essay, titled Once More to the Lake, passed my eyes about 40 years ago, probably about exactly that. My advisor, helping me to be a better writer there in seminary, suggested I read Strunk and White's Guide to Writing, a little bitty book, of which I remember only one rule: omit needless words. That led me further to White's collected essays, of which this is one, and this book, now about to fall apart, is the volume I purchased so many years ago. In looking at it this summer, I noticed that this week it was 36 years between White's experience as a boy, which he's narrating, and his experience with his boy in 1941, between 1904 and 1941. And that when I first read it in 1977, it had been 36 years from the point that he had written the essay, and it is now, well, almost exactly that, 38 years since I first read it. We live in a universe of circles. Ralph Waldo Emerson noted in one of his great essays, circles, the earth as it turns, the moon as it orbits the earth, and they both waltzing around the sun. The sun itself strolls the galaxy, sashaying up and down as it goes. We sense this in our little human ways with hours and days, weeks and months. And who knows that the gnat or even the microbe could no more comprehend a year than we could the Buddhist kalpa, a term for 16 million years. This place, though, calls us every 7 days, though not everyone obeys. Something about a week still feels very real to us, and in that place of pause at the top of the roller coaster, when for a moment we can behold past, present, and future all at once, we come here. We who come here find it wholesome, which doesn't mean that it's good for you like Wonder Bread, but it means it makes us whole in some way we would not be without it, and reminds us of the wholeness of the universe that we sense but can rarely actually touch. If you are here for that hope, to assert that longing, to pause at the top of the hill, welcome. This is Fountain Street Church, where every soul who enters has a story to tell and a place in at least the spiritual choir. My mother had tuberculosis when she was young. It was a gift of a stepfather who, after he gave it to her, promptly left altogether. She was just out of high school, she was, working as a telephone operator, a vocation that people under 20 would no more understand than if I said she was a farrier or a teamster. In those days, there was no cure for tuberculosis, only rest, preferably in clean, cold air. So she was taken to what was called then a sanatorium, a place to get well in western Maryland, 3 hours west of Baltimore, where she lived. My father, who had recently met her at a dance while on leave from his Coast Guard duties, it was 1944 after all, had started to visit, to call upon her, and took himself up to visit her at the sanatorium, a considerable trip each way. This devotion sealed the deal for her. And after they were married, they went back to the cooler Appalachian hills for their vacations. In the summer of 1955, I think, there were 4 of us, my mother, my father, me, and my baby brother Howard. He was born in March, which made him 6 months old. It was Labor Day weekend, as my folks told me later when I asked about this trip, and the place was a state park that I can't recall, the kind that have rented cabins by lakes. The beach was nearly empty, and Mom sat on one blanket with baby Howard next to her on another. She wore sunglasses, which I both remember and confirm from the black and white photographs I saw years later. Dad took me out into the lake. It was a long, long walk to get into the water with very shallow parts, and he held me in his arms, my 2.5-year-old legs wrapped about his waist. As we came close to the shore after getting wet, he went to set me down in the water, which I resisted, not knowing that the water was very shallow. He insisted, and so I put my feet down and discovered, yes, I could stand and not drown. But there we stood, hand in hand, me up to my waist and he up to his shins in our boxy swimsuits, waving at my mother. The sky was cloudy and the air was cold, but the water was warm. back to 1941. We went fishing the first morning. I felt the same damp moss covering the worms in the bait can, and I saw the dragonfly alight on the tip of my rod as it hovered a few inches from the surface of the water. It was the arrival of this fly that convinced me beyond any doubt that everything was always as it had been, that the years were a mirage, and that there had been no years. The small waves were the same, chucking the rowboat under the chin as we fished at anchor. And the boat was the same boat, the same color green, and the ribs broken in the same places, and under the floorboards the same freshwater leavings and debris, the dead helmagrite, the wisps of moss, the rusty discarded fish hook, the dried blood from yesterday's catch. We stared silently at the tips of our rods as the dragonflies that came and went. I lowered the tip of mine into the water tentatively, pensively dislodging the fly, which darted 2 feet away, poised, darted back 2 feet, and came to rest again a little further up the rod. There had been no years between the ducking of this dragonfly and the other one, the one that was part of memory. I looked at the boy who was silently watching his fly, and it was my hands that held his rod, my eyes watching. I felt dizzy and didn't know which rod I was at the end of. Another summer, another lake also up in the wilds of western Maryland, a place called New Germany State Park with tall pines and creosoted cabins that smelled of trees and smoke. There were 6 of us now, my parents, 2 boys plus 2 girls. Some used to call that a matched set. The park is miles away from the nearest town of Grantsville, Maryland. So before we go to the park, we stop there to buy milk and coffee and eggs, other things, but most importantly, Mennonite bread. The grocers were Mennonites, and they cooked and they baked it themselves. The men in the family had beards, and the women wore starched white caps and long dresses. Unlike the Amish, they drove automobiles, but painted the chromework black because it would be too vain to let it shine. They baked bread that rose up so high and smelled so yeasty that not eating it on the way to the cabin was sheer torture. Once we were there, Mom would carve thick slices from these tall loaves, often that had large holes in the middle of them from yeast overblowing itself, and we would try to spread cold butter on them, and we would tear the bread on the way. Then, after the snack, we would scramble into our swimsuits and run downhill too fast for our little legs to the little lake made by a tiny dam. The beach was as much dirt as sand, and a lifeguard sat on a folding chair in the shade with zinc oxide on his nose. On the other side of the little lake was a dock, and you could rent a rowboat, which we did, and Dad taught us how to row. Keep an object direct astern, he said. Reach and dip and pull and lift. How to turn with one oar or rotate using both. Boys and markers warned us to stay away from the swimming area. We sometimes fished from the pier, catching little sunfish, if any at all. And sometimes we would go below the little dam to the stream that trickled out and hunt for crayfish, which we caught more often than we caught sunfish. In either case, we threw them back after traumatizing them for a while. But it was swimming that drew us out every morning. Not until the lifeguard appeared and blew his whistle could we enter, and then all of us kids would roar into the water, splashing and then diving and screaming with pleasure. It was nearly September one year, maybe when I was 8 or 9, and we were leaving that day, but Mom insisted that we swim for a while, this being the very end of summer vacation and the last swim we might get for months. As we swam, the sky was turning cloudy and the water felt cold without the sun on it. So I asked my mother, "Can I come out now?" From the shore, she said, "Yes, you can, but no, you may not." I was confused. "Can I come out now?" "Yes, you can, but no, you may not." By now I was shivering and confused. "Can I come out now?" "Say, may I come out?" Shivering, I replied, "May I come out now?" "Yes, you may." When I submitted this order of worship, I put a question mark after the word prayer. We're not a very prayerful people, Fountain Streeters. Unless you mean in that formal sense of addressing a known outsider with power to impact our personal lives. We don't do that. That doesn't mean there isn't one. It just means that we don't do that. But that does not mean we do not pray. Anne Lamott, a familiar author to many of you and classmate of my wife back in college days, penned a book that's about prayer in which she says there are only 3 prayers: help, thanks, and wow. I think there's a 4th, oops. But in all of these cases, they are an expression of communication to something you sense is present that you'd like to be in touch with a little bit more directly. Call it superstition, call it wishful thinking, but prayer in its actual literal sense is to ask. In some ways, all we're asking for is a little attention. Can I come out now? And we hope that whoever, whatever might be listening doesn't say, yes, you can, but no, you may not. We are asking the universe to wave, to smile, perhaps to offer a hand, or at least not to turn its back. Here at the end of summer, as we collect the memories of another warming season, I ask now that you give a moment of silent contemplation in whatever form suits you most truly, to say help or thanks or wow or oops to the universe, to ask if you can come out now and hope for a yes. If this is prayer, so let us pray. And for those in our midst, not in this room, but in our lives, those in our families, our neighborhoods, our friendships, and our workplaces, those near to us, dear to us, whose lives perhaps are less wholesome than they would wish, we lift our hearts in praise and gratitude for help, that any goodness that may come to them may come to the family of Marty Childs, whom we shall remember this Saturday, to Stephanie Hicks and her family, to those known or unknown, for whom momentary burdens may be upon them, even our own. We ask if only some kindness and company, that they have it. And let us ever say, amen. Back to Maine. Summertime, oh summertime, pattern of life indelible, the fade-proof lake, the woods unshatterable, the pasture with the sweet fern and the juniper forever and ever, summer without end. This was the background, and the life along the shore was the design, the cottagers with their innocent and tranquil design, their tiny docks with the flagpole and the American flag floating against the white clouds in the blue sky, the little paths over the roots of the trees leading from camp to camp, and the paths leading back to the outhouses and the can of lime for sprinkling there, and at the souvenir counters at the store, the miniature birch bark canoes and the postcards that showed things looking a little better than they actually looked. This was the American family at play, escaping the city heat, wondering whether the newcomers in the camp at the head of the cove were common or nice, wondering whether it was true that the people who drove up for Sunday dinner at the farmhouse were turned away because there wasn't enough chicken. It seemed to me, as I kept remembering all this, that those times and those summers had been infinitely precious and worth saving. There had been jollity and peace and goodness. The arriving had been so big a business in itself at the railway station, the farm wagon drawn up, the first smell of the pine-laden air, the first glimpse of the smiling farmer and the great importance of the trunks and your father's enormous authority in such matters, and the feel of the wagon under you for the long 10-mile haul, and at the top of the last long hill, catching the first view of the lake after 11 months of not seeing this cherished body of water, the shouts and cries of the other campers when they saw you, and the trunks to be unpacked to give up their rich burden. Parenthetically, arriving was less exciting nowadays when you sneaked up in your car and parked it under a tree near the camp and took out the bags, and in 5 minutes it was all over. No fuss, no loud, wonderful fuss about trunks.
Where has the time all gone to? Haven't done half the things I want to. Oh well, we'll catch up some other time. This day was just a token. Too many words still spoken. But oh well, we'll catch up some other time. Just when the fun is starting, comes the time for party. But let's be glad for what we've had and what's to come. There's so much more embracing still to be done, but time is racing. Oh well, we'll catch up some other time. We'll catch up some other time.
Another summer, another lake. This time it's Lake Champlain. And I am grown, and I am now 3. Myself, my wonderful wife, our son Aaron, all 3 of us. And we are in Vermont because Mom and Dad moved to St. Albans in 1974, where they will spend the rest of their days. But no, it's 1987, maybe 1988. No, 1987. We have come to visit from our little church in rural Massachusetts, 3 hours to the south. We are there with my sister-in-law and my niece and nephew, there on a perfect summer day on the lake, on the shore of Lake Champlain, on a beach. Aaron is about 3, and Wendy says, "Go, take him out there. It's a shallow area. Get wet." He has his arms around my neck and his legs about my waist, and we both laugh as the choppy lake licks our loins and splashes our faces. Eventually, we come back toward the shore, and as my arms are tired, I set him down in the water when it was shallow enough, and we stood there holding hands, waving from the shore. Wendy waves back. And just at that moment, I am standing next to my father, holding his hands up to my waist, in the backwoods of Maryland. The circles of life have rolled around and coincided, and I am both father and son. I can feel his hand in mine. Mine hand is his, the son's hand in mine, my fatherly hand in his. I become all at once. And I remember the boxy swim trunks that came to my navel and reached to my knees that are now on Aaron's little smooth round body, and feel what it was to be 2.5 and holding my father's hand as I hold his. Wordsworth touched upon this when he wrote, "The child is father of the man. I wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety." Here we are, my friends, toward the end of summer. Yes, it has 2 or 3 weeks yet to play out, but we will be back at work on Tuesday. The season of languor has come to its end when time slows and puddles. It is when we all find communion with our past, when we go to lakes and cabins or to see relatives. We remember what it was like to be young and to smell the hot grass and the real pleasure of cold drinks when perspiring. The weather will linger, yes, but we will walk out of Eden on Tuesday and resume wringing our bread from the sweat of our brow. It is probably best that we do. The world does need a little help now and then, and we're the only ones around to do it. But who can blame us if we feel a little tinge of loss as summer becomes a sunset? Norman Maclean famously said, "Eventually all things merge into one, and a river runs through it." Only now and then does the current eddy and allow our past to catch up to our present. Often it comes with actual waters to the place in our boyhoods and girlhoods in our past where we ran into the lake screaming with joy or slithered along hoping to find the tadpole or the frog or the fish at the end of the hook. We want to come to those wet places, liquid places, where the tocks and ticks of life become waves lapping at the shore of our skin. They don't count time, but beat against us like heartbeats as we are held against our mother or father. The breathing and beating of life itself. That is summer, to enter the lake of time and feel its lapping comforts. In it or by it, we find Wendell Berry's Peace of Wild Things that give heed to no clock or calendar. And so we are here today, seized by the tyranny of the week and the obligations of adulthood, the realities of time and the importance that we give ourselves to bid farewell to a place we all know we belong and long to return. Until the next dance of the sun brings us round again, and the raising of the temperatures will remind us of what it was like to go once more to the lake. I invite you to sit as we take one last tour around the lake. We had a good week in camp, said White. The bass were biting well and the sun shone endlessly, day after day. We would be tired at night and lie down in the accumulated heat of the little bedrooms after the long hot day, and breeze would stir almost imperceptibly outside, and the smell of the swamp drift in and through the rusty screens. Sleep would come easily, and in the morning the red squirrel would be on the roof tapping out his gay routine. I kept remembering everything, lying in bed in the morning, the small steamboat that had the rounded stern, and how quietly she ran in the moonlight sails when the older boys played their mandolins and the girls sang and we ate donuts dipped in sugar, and how sweet the music was on the water in the shining night, and what it felt like to think about girls then. After breakfast, we would go up to the store, and the things were in the same place, the minnows in a bottle, the plugs and the spinners disarranged and pawed over by the youngsters from the boys' camp, the fig Newtons and the Beeman's gum. Outside, the road was tarred, and cars stood in front of the store. Inside, all was just as it had always been, except there was more Coca-Cola, not so much Moxie. We would walk out with a bottle of pop apiece, and sometimes the pop would backfire up our noses and hurt. We explored the streams quietly where the turtles slid off the sunny logs and dug their way into the soft bottom, and we lay on the town wharf and fed worms to the tame bass. Everywhere we went, I had trouble making out which was I, the one walking at my side, the one walking in my pants. When the others went swimming, my son said he was going in too. He pulled his dripping trunks from the line where they had hung all through a rain shower and wrung them out. Languidly, with no thought of going in, I watched him, his hard little body skinny and bare, saw him wince slightly as he pulled up around his vitals the small, soggy, icy garment. As he buckled the swollen belt, suddenly my groin felt the chill of death. Stephen was perhaps 5 one summer at the ocean with friends and children. Quite the little crowd, 8 of us altogether, including a very game grandma. A hurricane had stirred up the surf a bit, and we all knew better than to swim out in it, but the waves were delightful as they came in and splashed over us. I put Steve in my arms, and we walked out, not quite waist high. The waves came in so tall, I jumped up a tiny bit so they would crest just at our head. Oh, how we laughed. We were all laughing. Then a stronger wave came and tilted me backwards, and another right behind it, and suddenly we were falling down. The sand slipped beneath my feet as the surf crawled and pulled it away. We were now lying in the water, and the water clawed at us as it did the sand. Steve's legs, slippery little 5-year-old legs, slipped their grip on me, young boys being slippery after all. And one of the 2 hands loosened, Waves kept coming. I felt the ocean pulling Steve away from me and knew that the one thing I had to do was keep hold of him. For a moment, a terrible, long moment, he was just a wrist I held desperately as my other hand tore at the sand to keep us from being swept out. We obviously made it free of the ocean's grip. I stood up slowly, first on my knees, my belly red with scratches, Steve crying. The lifeguard was on the verge of jumping. At the end of your hour, you wish an uplifting noise, something to send you grateful into the world, and here I am telling you of death nearby, because we know in some deep place that waters are not only our origin, but our destination as well. Gilgamesh and Noah were no fools. Floods really are the most cosmic thing there is. The waters of life, of reality, circle around again and again. They always will, and sometimes, yes, they're with the crawfish and the sunfish, and perhaps on the back of little boats, and we will find ourselves holding hands with ourselves by the shore. But another time, we all know it will come. The waters of life will sweep us back into their liquid eternity. Norman MacLean again, noticing the sadness of a life spent poorly, writes, I am haunted by waters. We are all haunted by waters, the womb and tomb of our lives, and we offer up our gratitude in many ways. It doesn't matter where, whether it be here or at home at the lake, whether it be in the hug you give the child or the grandchild, or the parting wave as they pull away and go home. We are all haunted by the waters of life. We come here to pause in honor, in gratitude, and in hope that even in being swept away, we will be taken once more to the lake and hold hands with that which lasts forever.
Every day is spring while we're young. None can refuse. Time flies so fast, too dear to lose and too sweet to last. Though it may be just for today, share our love we must while we may. So blue the skies, all sweet surprise shines before our eyes while we're young. Though it may be just for today, share our love we must while we may. So blue the skies, all sweet surprise